afternoon, everybody. It is Steve Lookner with Agenda Free TV coming to you with some breaking news this afternoon. A U.S. appeals court has ruled that most of President Trump's tariffs are illegal. Now, this ruling is expected to be appealed to the Supreme Court. So it seems like the Supreme Court will have a final say on this. But if this ruling is upheld by the Supreme Court, this would obviously have a big impact on President Trump's international economic policy. Well, I guess economic policy in general. So we want to bring you an update on this. Again, it is expected this ruling will be appealed to the Supreme Court. From what I understand right now, the tariffs are allowed to stay in effect, but I'm seeing some different things about that. We'll see if President Trump comes out with some comment about this in the near future. Oh, President Trump just posted on it. President Trump just called the judge highly partisan. And he said the Supreme Court's going to help. Let me show you this right now. President Trump just posted. Oh my gosh, he just posted right now. Look at this. Just as I was saying, will we hear from President Trump? Here it is. Hold on, here it is. President Trump just posted on Truth Social. He said all tariffs are still in effect. Today, a highly partisan appeals court incorrectly said our tariffs should be removed, but they know the United States of America will win in the end. If these tariffs ever went away, it would be total disaster for the country. It would make us financially weak, and we have to be strong. The USA will no longer tolerate enormous trade deficits and unfair tariffs and non-tariff trade barriers imposed by other countries, friend or foe, that undermine our manufacturers, farmers, and everyone else. If allowed to stand, this decision would literally destroy the United States of America. Again, President Trump just said, if allowed to stand, this appeals court decision would literally destroy the United States of America. At the start of this Labor Day weekend, we should all remember that tariffs are the best tool to help our workers and support companies that produce great made-in-America products. For many years, tariffs were allowed to be used against us by our uncaring and unwise politicians. Now, with the help of the United States Supreme Court. So he thinks the Supreme Court is going to overturn the appeals court. Now, with the help of the United States Supreme Court, he says, we will use tariffs to the benefit of our nation and make America rich, strong, and powerful again. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So there you go. Right as we were coming on the air, President Trump posts that if the appeals court decision is allowed to stand, it would literally destroy the United States of America. And he called the appeals court highly partisan. So there you go. By the way, thanks. We're going to talk about this ruling a bit. Hey, thanks to our moderators, Danny James, Robert Mayqueen, Janet B., Beth Mythical. Thank you for moderating over on YouTube. Over there on Twitch, I want to shout out our moderators over there. Matthew Kohai 3 and McBridges moderating right there right now. Thank you. Over on X, Linda Bell, Larry, and Misha moderate for us over there on Facebook. Thank you to all of our moderators over there. Kay Lowry Body and Margaret Riley moderating. Hey, also I want to say a quick thanks to some people. Thanks so much to Smitty Smith, who wonders if this ruling includes the expiration of the Deminimus exemption. That's a good question. I don't know. We'll talk about that in a second. Smitty Smith said that went into effect today and really hurt my business because 65% of my sales are outside the U.S. So we'll talk about that shortly. I believe what Smitty is talking about is this policy change under Trump that just went into effect that used to allow, this policy used to allow packages, I think under $800 worth of goods to come into the U.S. duty-free. And that has now, I think, been changed, that policy. But I got to refresh my memory on it. I don't know if this impacts, if this ruling impacts that in theory. So that's a good question, Smitty. So I got to check that. Also, thanks to Hopinson for your support. Adam, our member. Thanks for being a member for a year, Adam. Thanks, PZ Papa Zulu, for the gift memberships. PH Survivor 92, who says, who didn't see this decision coming? Lunar Guardian, thank you for being a member. And also, thanks to all of you for watching. Okay, so you see what President Trump has to say. He said that the appeals court is highly partisan. If allowed to stand, the decision would literally destroy the United States of America. And he says that the Supreme Court is going to help out and is going to overturn the appeals court decision. That's what Trump says. Now, let's show you some reporting on this here. Hang on a moment. Here's a headline from Reuters. Most Trump tariffs are not legal. U.S. appeals court rules. So look, we don't know what the Supreme Court's going to say, but it seems like it's at least highly possible. It's at least highly possible that ultimately most of these tariffs will go away. I don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do, but it seems at least highly possible. So Reuters says a divided U.S. appeals court, I believe it was a 7-4 ruling, but I got to check, it's 7-4. A divided U.S. appeals court ruled on Friday that most of Donald Trump's tariffs are illegal, undercutting the Republican president's use of the levies as a key international economic policy tool. The court allowed the tariffs to remain in place through October 14th to give the Trump administration a chance to file an appeal with the U.S. Supreme Court, which surely they will. So for now, the tariffs are staying in place. Trump has made tariffs a pillar of U.S. foreign policy in his second term, using them to exert political pressure and renegotiate trade deals with countries that export goods to the United States. The tariffs have given the Trump administration leverage to extract economic concessions from trading partners, but have also increased volatility in financial markets. The court said the statute bestows significant authority on the president to undertake a number of actions in response to a declared national emergency, but none of these actions explicitly include the power to impose tariffs, duties, or the like, or the power to tax. So, I'm not a legal expert, but basically what they're saying is the Trump administration argued that they said this law makes it legal for us to impose these tariffs. And what the appeals court said is no, the law that you are citing for legal justification to impose these tariffs, the appeals court said that law does not actually give you, President Trump, the power to impose those tariffs. Now, the ruling is like this long ruling. I'm not going to attempt to go through the legal reasoning of the ruling and try to make sense of it for you because I don't have the background to. I'll post a link to the ruling. I actually posted it on my X account a short while ago. It's dozens of pages long. Hang on a moment here. Let me just pull it up here so I can show you. And I'll post a link in the chat. I have it right here. But it's not like a single page ruling or something like that. Here. Here it is right here. United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. So, I mean, if I just start scrolling through here, you can see it's not a short ruling. The whole document is about 127 pages. Now, there might be, let's see here. This part is, anyways, maybe we'll go through some of this and see if we can pull out some stuff. But I think there might be several different opinions in here. I'm going to post a link to this in the chat, and you can look through it if you want. But let's stick with the basics for now. Again, most tariff trumps are not legal U.S. appeals court rules. So they said that the court said that the law that the Trump administration cites, the Trump administration says gives them the power to impose these tariffs, the appeals court said no, that law does not give you that power. Democratic presidents appointed 6 judges in the majority and 2 judges who dissented, while Republican presidents appointed 1 judge in the majority and 2 dissenters. The court's decision does not impact tariffs issued under other legal authority, such as Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. Trump just justified, where is that? Both sets of tariffs as well as more recent tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. IEEPA gives the president the power to address unusual and extraordinary threats during national emergencies. The ruling said it seems unlikely that Congress intended, in enacting this law, the IEEPA, to depart from its past practice and grant the president unlimited authority to impose tariffs. The law, says the court, neither mentions tariffs or any of its synonyms, nor has procedural safeguards that contain clear limits on the president's power to impose tariffs. The 1977 law had historically been used for imposing sanctions on enemies or freezing their assets. Trump, the first president to use this law to impose tariffs, says the measures were justified given trade imbalances, declining U.S. manufacturing power, and the cross-border flow of drugs. So Trump's Department of Justice has argued that the law allows tariffs under emergency provisions that authorize a president to regulate imports or block them completely. So again, the legal question here is President Trump, the Trump administration has said Trump has the power to impose these tariffs because this law gives us that power. And the court is saying, no, that law does not give you that power. A majority of the appeals court said, no, the law does not give you that power. The law doesn't even mention tariffs. So that's going to be apparently the question for the Supreme Court to decide. Let's see. There was little reaction to the ruling in after-hours stock trading. One expert, Brian Jacobson with Annex Wealth Management, said, companies will probably continue to operate as though the tariffs will stay in effect, since the court is letting the tariffs stay in place for now. He said the Trump administration will probably resort to other powers to impose temporary tariffs. I don't know what that means. So if the Trump administration loses this in the Supreme Court, could they try to impose tariffs citing another law? I don't know. Reuters says the appeals court ruled on 2 cases, one brought by 5 U.S. small businesses and the other by 12 Democratic-led U.S. states, which argued that IEEPA, which is the law that the Trump administration said gave them the power to do this, does not authorize tariffs. The Constitution, says Reuters, grants Congress, not the president, the authority to issue taxes and tariffs, and any delegation of that authority to the president must be both explicit and limited according to the lawsuits. Little more background here, then I'll take some comments from you. Hold on a second here. Is this going to work? The New York-based U.S. Court of International Trade in May ruled against Trump's tariff policies, saying the president had exceeded his authority when he imposed both sets of challenged tariffs. That 3-judge panel included a judge who was appointed by Trump in his first term. I guess that ruling was appealed to the appeals court. Another court in Washington ruled that the IEEPA does not authorize Trump's tariffs, and the government has appealed that decision as well. Oh, okay. So there's a different ruling by a different court that said the law did not authorize Trump's tariffs, and the government has also appealed that decision. At least 8 lawsuits have challenged Trump's policies, including one filed by the state of California. So it looks like where this is going is to the Supreme Court. That's what it looks like. But this is an important ruling, and I think President Trump thought it was important enough to post about it just minutes ago. So let me again show you what President Trump said about this appeals court ruling declaring most of his tariffs illegal. President Trump said, all tariffs are still in effect. Today, a highly partisan appeals court incorrectly said that our tariffs should be removed, but they know the United States of America will win in the end. If these tariffs ever went away, it would be a total disaster for the country. It would make us financially weak, and we have to be strong. The USA will no longer tolerate enormous trade deficits and unfair tariffs and non-tariff trade barriers imposed by other countries, friend or foe, that undermine our manufacturers, farmers, and everyone else. If allowed to stand, Trump says, this decision would literally destroy the United States of America. At the start of this Labor Day weekend, we should all remember that tariffs are the best tool to help our workers and support companies that produce great made-in-America products. For many years, tariffs were allowed to be used against us by our uncaring and unwise politicians. Now, he says, with the help of the United States Supreme Court, we will use them to the benefit of our nation and make America rich, strong, and powerful again. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Okay, let's take some comments from you. By the way, thanks to Storming Art for your support. Who thinks the left always wants businesses to be taxed but get mad when Trump does it via tariffs. Now, President Trump has said, and his administration has said, that these tariffs are being paid by other countries. But the tariffs get paid by the importers who bring them into the U.S. Life of Shelby, thank you. Jean Paul Lachance, thanks for the memberships. Thanks to PZ Papa Zulu, who thinks Trump plays multi-dimensional chess while everyone else plays checkers. Thank you to Temi Dank, who thinks Trump should consider going through Congress instead of using bogus emergencies to rule by decree. Thank you, Adrian Goodman, for the membership, and Laura and Mitchell Pilot, and Enoch 123. Also, Silent Owl Scribe says tariffs are taxes. Andrea says Trump has gotten many tariffs on American goods sold overseas reduced by negotiations. Rye Guy says it's not the 1800s anymore. Tariffs are just a tax on Americans. Chaz Martin says, I say let the tariffs roll. Now, again, the appeals court and the Supreme Court, they're not ruling on whether they like tariffs or not. What they are ruling on is, does President Trump have the power to impose these tariffs? As the Reuters article said, the Constitution grants Congress, oops, by the way, I got to fix this. Let me just get that red ticker should not be up there. That's from a previous stream. As Reuters says, the Constitution grants Congress, not the President, the authority to issue taxes and tariffs, and any delegation of that authority must be both explicit and limited. Now, the Trump administration had said that in this 1977 law, Congress had given the president the power to do this. But the appeals court found that no, the law, in their opinion, did not give the president the power to do this. So that's going to be, I mean, it sounds like there's some other cases floating around against some other lawsuits against the tariffs, but that would certainly sound like it has to be one of the things that the Supreme Court rules on, assuming, which is, I would say, almost certain. I mean, I think it's certain because President Trump already said this going to the Supreme Court. So Trump has said that the Supreme Court, it's going to be appealed to the Supreme Court. So will we get to a place, assuming there'll be a Supreme Court appeal, will the Supreme Court rule with Trump, or will we see most of these tariffs go away? I have no idea. I don't know what's going to happen. All right, give me a moment here. We're going to take some more of your comments. We're going to give you more updates. Hang on a second here. I'm going to show you some more reporting on this. But, I mean, it's certainly an important story, and it would be a huge ruling if it's upheld by the Supreme Court. Phil Mattingly from CNN says this tariff case has long been barreling to the Supreme Court, toward the Supreme Court. He says that is the next stop. Again, Phil Mattingly of CNN says the next stop for this case is the Supreme Court. I don't know when we would expect the court ruling to be. Let me show you another update on this here. Here, update from AP. Appeals court finds Trump's tariffs illegally used emergency power, but leaves them in place for now. A federal appeals court ruled today that President Trump had no legal right to impose sweeping tariffs, but left in place for now his effort to build a protectionist wall around the American economy. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit ruled Trump was not legally allowed to declare national emergencies and impose import taxes on almost every country on earth. A ruling that largely upheld, so a ruling that largely did not overturn, a May decision by a specialized federal trade court in New York. But the 7-4 court ruling did not strike down the tariffs immediately, allowing the Trump administration time to appeal the Supreme Court. The president vowed to do just that. As I mentioned, he posted on Truth Social, if allowed to stand, this decision would literally destroy the United States of America. AP says the ruling complicates Trump's ambitions to upend decades of American trade policy completely on his own, without Congress. Trump has alternative laws for imposing import taxes. Oh, so the idea here is, again, Trump had appealed to a certain law saying, this law gives me the power to do this. The appeals court said, no, that law does not give you the power to do this. Now, AP is saying Trump could impose the taxes based on other laws. Trump has alternative laws for imposing import taxes, but they would limit the speed and severity with which he could act. So, I guess that means if the Supreme Court agrees with the appeals court and these tariffs go away, President Trump could then try imposing the tariffs again by appealing to another law or laws, but he would be limited on how fast he could do that and how severe the tariffs would be. Trump's tariffs and the erratic way in which he's rolled them out, says AP, have shaken global markets, alienated U.S. trading partners and allies, and raised fears of higher prices and slower economic growth. But he has also used the tariffs to pressure the EU, Japan, and other countries into accepting one-sided trade deals and to bring tens of billions of dollars into the federal treasury to help pay for the massive tax cuts he signed into law on July 4th. So if the Supreme Court ultimately sides with the appeals court and the tariffs go away, what happens to the trade deals that other countries agreed to with the U.S. to try to get the tariffs reduced? Because now there won't, if the Supreme Court sides with the appeals court, there won't be the tariffs anymore. I don't know what happens with that. Here, let me read you a bit more of this. One expert, the senior counsel at Holland and Knight law firm and a former Justice Department trial lawyer, Ashley Akers, said, even before the appeals court decision, while existing trade deals might not automatically unravel, the administration could lose a pillar of its negotiating strategy, which may embolden foreign governments to resist future demands, delay implementation of prior commitments, or even seek to renegotiate terms. So what he's saying is, if ultimately the Supreme Court rules with the appeals court and strikes down the tariffs, other countries might try to renegotiate their trade deals or just not go along with them anymore. We don't know. The government has argued that if the tariffs are struck down, it might have to refund some of the import taxes it has collected, delivering a financial blow to the U.S. Treasury. It would be 1929 all over again, a Great Depression, Trump said previously on Truth Social. Okay, this is interesting. I'm going to read a little more of this article because it's quite informative. So I'll read some more of this and we'll take some more comments. By the way, thank you to Hebrew Jerusalem Prince, who believes that tariffs are a tax on the American people which increases inflation on goods and thinks they're destroying the economy. That's what Hebrew Jerusalem Prince says. Thank you so much, the Karzar, who thinks this is a overreach by the lower courts that will be overturned by the Supreme Court. Thanks also Linda Canadian Nurse, who mentioned the postal offices thing. Yeah, we're gonna talk about the Deminimus exemption shortly. It's a somewhat related story, but I want to talk about the tariffs thing first. So we'll get to that, Linda. Thank you for your support. Okay, so AP points out that revenue from the tariffs totaled $142 billion in July, more than double what it was at the same point the year before. Indeed, the Justice Department warned in a legal filing this month that revoking the tariffs could mean financial ruin for the United States. I guess because they'd have to give them back, maybe? The ruling today involves two sets of import taxes, both of which Trump justified by declaring a national emergency under the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Again, according to the Reuters article I read you earlier, Congress normally has the power to do tariffs, not the president. So Congress has to give the president power to do tariffs by passing some sort of law. Trump argued when imposing the tariffs that this 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which was passed by Congress and signed by the president back then, gave him the power to impose these tariffs. But the appeals court today said, no, that law does not give you that power to impose these tariffs. The sweeping tariffs Trump announced on April 2nd, Liberation Day, he called it, when he imposed reciprocal tariffs of up to 50% on countries with which the United States runs trade deficits and a baseline 10% tariffs on just about everyone else. He justified that by appealing to this law, okay? And also the trafficking tariffs he announced on February 1st, on imports from Canada, China, and Mexico. He said there was a national emergency, the illegal flow of drugs and immigrants across their borders into the United States. And for the Liberation Day tariffs, he said there was a national emergency, a long-running gap between what the U.S. sells and what it buys from the rest of the world. So in both of those cases, he said, I'm allowed to do these tariffs because I'm declaring a national emergency, and this law from 1977 lets me declare a national emergency and use that to justify the tariffs. AP says the Constitution gives Congress the power to impose tariffs, to impose taxes, including tariffs. But over decades, lawmakers have ceded authorities to the president, and Trump has made the most of the power vacuum. But Trump's assertion that the law IEEPA essentially gives him unlimited power to tax imports quickly drew legal challenges at least 7 cases. No president had ever used that law to justify tariffs. Okay? The plaintiffs argued that the emergency power law does not authorize the use of tariffs. They also noted, the plaintiffs who filed the lawsuit that was ruled on today, they noted that a trade deficit hardly meets the definition of an unusual and extraordinary threat that would justify declaring an emergency under the law. The United States, after all, has run trade deficits in which it buys more from foreign countries than it sells them for 49 straight years, and in good times and bad. Okay. Let me just see if I want to read. I want to get some more of your comments here. In May, the U.S. Court of International Trade in New York ruled that Trump's Liberation Day tariffs exceeded any authority granted to the president under the Emergency Powers Law. Okay. And then the appeals court also said that law, today said that law does not give the president the power to impose these tariffs. The court challenge does not cover Trump's other tariffs, including levies on foreign steel, aluminum, and autos that the president imposed after Commerce Department investigations concluded those imports were threats to U.S. national security. Nor does it include tariffs that Trump imposed on China in his first term and President Biden kept. Okay. And Trump could, if he loses the case in the Supreme Court, Trump could potentially cite alternative authorities to impose import taxes. But according to AP, one expert they talked about, where does it say here? No. According to AP, they said that if he wanted to use alternative laws for imposing import taxes, they would limit the speed and severity with which he could act. So I know it's kind of a technical, complex story. But again, appeals court, which is the next level up, is Supreme Court. That's it. That's the next stop. That's the last stop. A U.S. appeals court has ruled today that most of Trump's tariffs are illegal because he said, well, I can impose these tariffs because this law gives me the power to declare a national emergency and then impose the tariffs. And the appeals court said, no, that law does not give you that power, does not give the president that power. What will the Supreme Court say? I don't know. But obviously, if the Supreme Court sides with the appeals court, that's a huge policy difference because that'll get rid of all those tariffs talked about in this case. Most of his tariffs will just go away. So we'll have to see what happens. All right, let me take some more comments from you guys. Oh, and by the way, a couple quick thank yous here. Darren175, who says, punish American companies that manufacture their products overseas. Thank you, the Karzar, by the way, for your support. And let me read some more comments from you guys. I don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do. John thinks the court of Trump's supremacy will favor Trump. By the way, just as a reminder, I want to show you the Supreme Court judges, justices. Where can I find the current list? So you have, currently, there were 3 appointed by President Trump: Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. 1 appointed by Joe Biden, 2 appointed by Obama, and 2 appointed by George W. Bush, and 1 appointed by George H.W. Bush, Clarence Thomas. So Thomas appointed by George H.W. Bush, Roberts and Alito appointed by George W. Bush, Sotomayor and Kagan appointed by Obama, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett appointed by Trump, and Ketanji Brown Jackson appointed by Biden. So it's seen as a conservative court, but I don't know. I don't know enough about them to know how they might come down on this tariffs case. Janice thinks the court will favor Trump. Paul Winkle says they have not sworn allegiance to Trump. Thank you, Candy Larson, for the gift memberships. I appreciate that. And I also wonder, how long will it take them to rule on this? Because obviously it's a big deal whether or not these tariffs stay in place, and they are in place right now. So will they try to move fast on the case to get a ruling out there to settle the matter? Because obviously it has a huge impact on on this international economic policy of the U.S. Carlitos, our viewer, says appeals court isn't a real court? Let me see if I have new reporting here. Now, the Wall Street Journal, by the way, called this appeals court decision the biggest blow yet to one of the signature policies of Trump's second term. And they point out this is going to the Supreme Court next. Let's see here. Going to pull something else up for you. I want to talk about the Deminimus thing too. You can see that headline from the Washington Post. Appeals court strikes down Trump's tariffs as illegal but leaves them in place. Our viewer Yukon with Wids NC says Congress controls tariffs. P.A. Jeeper says talk to me after the Supreme Court rules. Thank you, Ivan, who says this sloppy diversion will not obscure the Trumpstein files. Wants the Epstein files released. Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, P.A. Jeeper, who thinks it'll be an easy call for the Supreme Court to overrule this. Do they have to be paid back to the countries? So one of the articles we were looking at said that very well might have to happen. I don't know if that's definitive, but it could happen that they have to get paid back. The Justice Department has talked about that. I don't know for sure if they would be. Hang on a second here. Let me show you what the Washington Post had to say. They said that appeals court strikes down Trump's tariffs as illegal but leaves them in place. President Trump's cornerstone economic policy was dealt another setback today when a federal appeals court ruled he did not have the authority to impose most of his sweeping tariffs on imports from dozens of trading partners. Trump's tariffs will be allowed to remain in effect for now to allow time for possible appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit upheld a lower court's decision. So that's a lower court ruled this, and the U.S. Court of Appeals did not overturn the ruling. They upheld it. They ruled that Trump overstepped his authority in using a 1977 law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to impose most of his tariffs. The emergency law is used in the case of threats against the country. A group of federal judges wrote in the ruling, the statute, the law, bestows significant authority on the president to undertake a number of actions in response to a declared national emergency. But none of these actions explicitly include the power to impose tariffs, duties, or the like, or the power to tax, said the groups of federal judges. The decision throws the future of Trump's foundational economic policy into uncertainty once more, just weeks after the president announced increased tariffs on more than 60 countries around the world. He might still announce more tariffs while this case is headed to the Supreme Court. You never know. The legal challenge was brought by a group of state governments, I believe it was Democratic states, and small businesses who argued in part that no such emergency exists to justify Trump using the law. I don't know if the court ruled on that. The Trump administration has disputed this, pointing to an executive order Trump signed earlier this year declaring the trade deficit a national emergency. The Justice Department is expected to appeal the ruling to the Supreme Court, meaning the issue could drag on for months. So the Washington Post says it could drag on for months before a resolution is reached. Tariffs have been allowed to remain in effect in the meantime, despite a lower court ruling them illegal, due to a stay while proceedings continue. Let me just read you a little more. This article, there's not much left in it. Just a little summary here of some background. Trump's tariff policy is based on his belief that the U.S., the world's largest economy, has been taken advantage of by trading partners who operate in a trade deficit to the country. The president has pledged the tariffs will bring a golden age back to the country's manufacturing, but the tariffs have been controversial among economists and trading partners. Tariffs are taxes that U.S. importers pay, and those costs are often passed on to businesses and to consumers who buy the goods. As a result, many view such tariffs as taxes on end users. The Washington Post claims that the U.S. economy is already starting to feel the effects of the policies, with a weaker than expected labor market revealed last week and consumers pull back on spending as companies and Americans evaluate the uncertainty of the policies. There's debate over how big the impact of these policies will ultimately be, if they're allowed to stay in place, by the way. There are other legal avenues for the White House to pursue tariffs. And if Trump's use of the law he has used so far is ultimate to impose the tariffs that were ruled illegal today, if his use of that law is found illegal by the Supreme Court, it's possible he will explore other laws to impose tariffs. So we'll see what the Supreme Court has to say. I think we might do a poll question. Again, I have no idea. I'm not a legal expert. Let's do a poll question. Will the Supreme Court agree and strike down the tariffs? Yes or no? So I'm asking whether they'll agree with the appeals court ruling. All right, I'm posting this right now. We're going to see what you guys have to say. Let me post it elsewhere on all the platforms. Oops. And we'll see what you guys have to say. I'm going to try posting on Facebook. Things have not been working well with the polls on Facebook lately, but I'll try here. Ugh. All right. I don't even know if it's working on Facebook, to be honest. The polls haven't been working there. All right. I said to you guys, what is the Supreme Court going to do about this? Let's see what you guys had to say. All right. Over there on YouTube, I said, will the Supreme Court agree and strike down the tariffs? 41% of you said the Supreme Court will agree with the appeals court and strike down the tariffs. 59% of you say no. Once again, the poll appears to be not working in Facebook. The polling is broken in Facebook. I'm sorry about this. I'm sorry about it. I can't help it. Things are frequently broken over there. What can I say? I'll keep trying with them. I'll message them again. I've already messaged them about it. And on Twitch, here's what you guys said. 66% on Twitch says the Supreme Court will rule with the Trump administration and not with the appeals court, and they will not strike down the tariffs. So more of you think the Supreme Court will go with Trump than go with the appeals court ruling. We'll have to see what happens. Thanks for voting in the poll, by the way. Thanks to, again, Jean-Paul LeChance for the memberships. Very much appreciate that, Jean-Paul. See here. Let's talk about also, while we're talking about the president's economic policies, let me just make sure he didn't post again about this. In case you missed it, President Trump did post saying all tariffs are still in effect. Today, a highly partisan appeals court incorrectly said our tariffs should be removed, but they know the United States of America will win in the end. If these tariffs ever went away, it would be a total disaster for the country. He says it would make us financially weak and we have to be strong. The USA will no longer tolerate enormous trade deficits and unfair tariffs and non-tariff trade barriers imposed by other countries, friend or foe, that undermine our manufacturers, farmers, and everyone else. If allowed to stand, he says, the appeals court decision would literally destroy the United States of America. At the start of this Labor Day weekend, we should all remember that tariffs are the best tool to help our workers and support companies that produce great made-in-America products. For many years, tariffs were allowed to be used against us by our uncaring and unwise politicians. Now, he says, with the help of the United States Supreme Court, who clearly he thinks is going to side with him, we will use them to the benefit of our nation and make America rich, strong, and powerful again. Thank you for your attention to this matter. The Watcher says, I'm waiting for a tweet from Newsom. I was looking to see if other prominent politicians had posted about this. Okay, so Katyal is one of the lawyers in this case, was one of the lawyers for the plaintiffs, because he had said earlier we won the tariffs case, Katyal. So Katyal, I want to show you something he posted. This is from his X account. Let me do it this way. So again, my understanding is that Katyal is one of the lawyers for the plaintiffs in the lawsuit that the appeals court ruled on today. He said core of court holding, and he cuts and pastes part of the ruling today, which is dozens of pages long. The court said, for the reasons discussed above, we discern no clear congressional authorization by the law, the IEEPA, for tariffs of the magnitude of the reciprocal tariffs and the trafficking tariffs. Reading the phrase regulate importation to include imposing those tariffs is a wafer-thin reed on which to rest such sweeping power. Again, President Trump, the Trump administration had said, we have the power to impose these tariffs because we were given by the power to do this by Congress in this 1977 law, IEEPA. But the appeals court today ruled, no, IEEPA does not give the president the power to impose these tariffs. That President Trump said he had the power given to him. That President Trump said he had the power to do because of this law. Black Irish says it's strange that a federal court can determine that an action is illegal and that an illegal act is allowed to continue. It's very interesting how that works. And I mean, it happens in all kinds of cases that you have a ruling, right? But the policy is allowed to stay in place. Now, it's a good legal question. Those stays of a decision that allow the ruling that allowed the current state of affairs to stay in place as the case is appealed. I do not know what the criteria are for when a court will say, yes, we've ruled against this thing, but it's allowed to stay in place for now. It's a great question, and I'm sure there's all kinds of literature on it, and I don't know, maybe they apply at different levels and there's different criteria for different types of cases. I don't know. But it's not for no reason. I'm sure there are reasons for it. Let me see if I can just quickly find you a couple of arguments. So Wikipedia has an article on stay of proceedings. Oops. Can you not see this? No, you can't. You'll see it in a second. A stay of proceedings is a ruling by the court in civil and criminal procedure that halts further legal process in a trial or other legal proceeding. According to the legal code in the U.S., a stay of proceedings can be issued in a case brought in any of the courts of the United States upon any issue, blah, 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 blah. The standard for stay of determinations ostensibly includes 4 factors: the likelihood of success on appeal, the likelihood of irreparable harm pending appeal, the balance of the hardships in the public interest. So, one thing that courts will look at is, well, if we allow this ruling to take effect now, rather than letting the appeals process completely play out, what are the effects of this going to be? What are the practical effects of this going to be? Is it going to cause harms? So I'm sure this is actually argued. Maybe you could even read about it in the ruling today. But again, I'm not familiar with with this topic in general and why the tariffs were allowed to stay in place. But I'm sure the court explained their view on that. Initially, when the news came out that the appeals court had ruled that most of these tariffs were illegal, for a few minutes it was not at all clear what the court had ruled about. Will they allow the tariffs to stay in place now while the case is appealed to the Supreme Court? Ultimately, they did allow that. I don't even know. I have this document here. Again, this is the ruling. I'll post a link to it in the chat. I don't even know if it's like the whole document's about 127 pages long. I don't even know if I could find the part in here where they talk about why they're allowing the tariffs to stay in place. So, anyways, I'm not going to go through it in detail now. Per Holstrand says, will inflation become a liability in the midterms? Well, at this point, we don't even know if the tariffs are going to be in place in a few months. And that could impact inflation one way or the other. Thanks, by the way, to the Car Czar. Thanks for your support, the Car Czar, an old cat lady. Old cat lady thinks lower court judges are using lawfare to stop Trump and the Supreme Court is not amused. Oh, thanks, Jean-Paul Lachance, for the additional memberships. That's very nice of you. Thank you. Okay, let's talk about hold on a moment here. Yeah, the New York Times also said that, I think we saw one of the other articles say that, no president had ever used this particular law that Trump used to, the economic emergency law, to impose tariffs. Now, like AP, the New York Times said that if the Supreme Court ultimately says, yes, we agree with the appeals court, these tariffs are illegal, President Trump could try to impose tariffs again, citing another law as authority to do it. But what the New York Times said, and it's similar to what AP said, is if the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs and agrees with the appeals court, and then Trump tries to put tariffs on appealing to another law, using another law, in that case, the new tariffs would be severely limited in their scope and duration. So from what I'm seeing in these articles, if the Supreme Court sides with the appeals court and strikes down the tariffs, President Trump won't just be able to put the same tariffs on citing a different law. He would be much more limited in what he could do or what he could try to do with tariffs in the future. Okay, we should also mention, some of our viewers mentioned the de minimis thing, which I think would be good to talk about. The de minimis exemption. Which I don't believe this ruling impacts that. But let me mention that because a couple of you have talked about it. It's an economic policy story and it's current. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. One of our viewers said it was impacting his business. Duty-free no more. Parcels worth under $800 no longer qualify for a U.S. tariff exemption. Now, actually, I take this back. So, actually, I might have this wrong. If the tariffs on these packages, I might have had this wrong. Now I'm thinking, if the tariffs that are going to be imposed on these packages, they might be the same tariffs that the appeals court today said were illegal. So if that's the case, then then the appeals court ruling would say the tariffs on these packages are illegal. But I don't know which tariffs have been traditionally put on these packages. Maybe there's tariffs put on these packages that are not mentioned in the appeals court ruling today. I don't know. Anyways, low value imports today lost their duty-free status in the U.S. as part of President Trump's agenda for making the nation less dependent on foreign goods and resetting global trade with tariffs. An executive order eliminated a widely used customs exemption for international shipments worth $800 or less as of 12:01 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time today, nearly 2 years earlier than the deadline set in the Tax Cuts and Spending Bill approved by Congress. Saying they received too little time and too little information to start collecting duties on small packages, the national postal services of more than 30 countries have temporarily suspended sending some or most U.S.-bound packages. They include the mail systems of Australia, New Zealand, India, Japan, Mexico, Thailand, and almost every country in Europe. Purchases that previously entered the U.S. in packages without needing to clear customs will now require vetting and be subject to their origin country's applicable tariff rate, which can range from 10 to 50%. For the next 6 months, mail carriers can instead apply a flat duty of $80 to $200 to packages sent through the global postal network. After that, both mailed parcels and those handled by private courier services will be subject to the value-based tariff rate. Although the president previously ended this de minimis rule for expensive items sent from China and Hong Kong, having to pay import taxes on small packages from everywhere else likely will be a big change for some small businesses and online shoppers in the U.S. In addition to bringing new costs, the withdrawal of duty-free treatment is likely to delay orders, according to logistics experts. Wow. So this is a big change that just came into place today. So, if somebody sends you a package, I don't know if you buy something that needs to get sent to you from outside the country and the shipment is worth less than $800, well, now it's going to have to pay a duty. There's going to be some sort of a tariff paid on it. Although for the first few months, it could be $80 to $200 instead of the tariff rate. That also could slow down. I mean, you could see why that would slow down delivery if they have to process all these packages. So again, this isn't directly part of the ruling today. Although, if the tariffs imposed on these packages are the tariffs that the ruling said today were illegal, then if the Supreme Court ultimately said the tariffs are illegal, then obviously those tariffs would not apply to the packages. Warco says, give it about 2 weeks. CH says, I hadn't heard about this. I can't confirm it. CH claims that Etsy stopped providing shipping labels to all of those countries shipping to the U.S. Paul Winkle thinks everything is getting more expensive. Thanks to Trump. Airtight Ski Pole thinks the judge, well, it was 11 judges who ruled 7-4. Airtight Ski Pole says the judge needs to be disbarred. Artist Caverlin says this is nothing less than punishing. Jaded Vino says just in time for Christmas. Let me read a little more of this. The Trump administration said this exemption for packages worth less than $800 has become a loophole that foreign businesses exploit to evade tariffs and criminals use to get drugs, counterfeit products, and other contraband into the U.S. Former President Biden and members of Congress also discussed the issues. Other countries have similar exemptions, but the threshold is usually lower. For example, in 20 European Union countries, they apply this exemption to packages worth less than 175 US dollars. The UK has an exemption for packages worth up to $182. In the US, this de minimis exemption, Latin for lacking significance or importance, started in 1938 as a way to save the federal government the time and expense of collecting duties on imported goods with a retail value of $1 or less. U.S. lawmakers eventually increased the eligibility cutoff to $5, then $200, then $800. Since then, the number of shipments claiming this exemption have exploded. Last year, a total of 1.36 billion packages with a combined value of $64.6 billion came into the U.S. last year. I guess sent under the rule, it seems to be saying, compared with 134 million packages in 2015. So there are, last year, if I'm reading this article right, 1.36 billion packages came in under this rule where the packages, the contents were not tariffed because the packages had a declared value of less than $800. About 60% of the 2024 shipments came from Canada, China, and Hong Kong. Multiple countries and regions accounted for the remainder, including Canada, Mexico, the European Union, India, and Vietnam. And as supporters of limiting this exemption argue that the exemption has provided a way for China-founded retail platforms like Temu and Shine to flood the U.S. with low-priced goods because they can ship these goods to the U.S. and they don't have to pay tariffs on them if the packages are worth less than $800. But some smaller American companies that rely on imported products and materials benefited from the exemption too. Also, I would think if you're somebody out there in America and you happen to buy stuff from other countries that was worth less than $800 when it was shipped to you, you're benefiting from this. I don't usually have this. There was one time I had to buy a computer part, and I bought it on eBay in the past year, and it was just shipped from China. So maybe now I guess that package would be tariffed, whereas it wasn't before. Kristen Trainer is worried the end of this exemption will mean the end of Diesel in Lulu's, her 3-year-old boutique in Avon, Connecticut. Over 70% of the clothes and accessories she stocks comes from small fashion houses in Italy, France, and Spain. She places small batch orders each week that fall under the $800 threshold. So she thinks that it's going to be too costly to run her business now because there's going to be tariffs on all these packages that come in from overseas to her business. Anyways, so P.A. Jeeper says, stop selling foreign goods. I don't know if that's an option for her. She said she was looking to replace her European vendors with ones based in the U.S., but her best-selling product categories, such as apparel made of Italian linen, come from other countries. Our viewer HMN thinks Trump is killing small businesses. Again, this is not directly part of the ruling today, but I am covering it because it's another economic policy thing that just came into effect today that some of our viewers had mentioned, so I wanted to talk about it. Let's see here. Yeah, you can see this. Here's another article about what happened today with this. U.S. tariff exemption for low-value packages ends with few hiccups. Well, I don't know if it's few hiccups because all these countries have said we're temporarily not even shipping stuff there to the U.S. anymore. So, anyways, Reuters said that. Hold on. If I can pull this up for you, I will. Reuters said that today, the U.S. ended tariff exemptions for parcel imports, package imports today, without the logistical hiccups that dogged prior attempts, while consumers, e-commerce companies, and small businesses using online marketplaces braced for cost increases and supply chain disruptions. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency began collecting normal tariff rates, normal duty rates, on all package shipments valued under $800, regardless of value, country of origin, or mode of transportation today. In the first 6 months, importers can opt to pay a flat rate duty of $80 to $200 per package shipped from foreign postal agencies instead of paying the duties. Trump administration officials said the change could boost U.S. customs revenues by $10 billion annually. The National Coalition of Textile Organizations in the U.S. hailed it as a historic win for U.S. manufacturing, following the closing of a loophole that allowed foreign fast fashion firms to avoid tariffs and import apparel, sometimes made with forced labor undercutting American jobs. That National Coalition of Textile Organizations said the administration's executive action closes this channel and delivers long overdue relief to the U.S. textile industry and its workers. More than 25 foreign postal services suspended mail to the U.S. in the run-up to today, helping the U.S. to... that's why this change has been easier today, because a lot of countries are not currently allowing packages to be shipped to the U.S. This helped the U.S. to avoid a repeat of the chaotic package pileup that forced the Trump administration to pull back on its first attempt at ending the Deminimus exemption for China in February. 95% of all de minimis shipments are handled by general cargo carriers or express shippers such as FedEx, UPS, and DHL. Retail and trade analysts said the end of this exemption is likely to raise prices for many goods sold through e-commerce companies, as those that previously avoided tariffs because of the exemption become subject to duties. This may put such firms on a par with costs for more established retailers like Walmart that tend to import merchandise in bulk containers that are subject to tariffs. It is also likely to curb trade on peer-to-peer platforms such as eBay and Etsy, which are used by small businesses to sell secondhand, vintage, or handmade items. So big change came into place this morning. Ben Jay thinks it's likely to raise up inflation. We'll have to see how this all impacts consumers and businesses in the U.S. So that's another economic story from today. We'll talk a little more about the ruling today. Obviously, we will cover the Supreme Court ruling that eventually will happen, which rules on the Supreme Court will rule on whether to uphold or overturn the appeals court ruling from today. That is the next step. A U.S. appeals court has ruled that most of Trump's tariffs are illegal because they say the law that Trump cited, that the law that Trump said gave him the power to impose these tariffs, the appeals court said it actually does not give him that power. Oh my gosh, we have a post from Pam Bondi about this. Attorney General Pam Bondi has posted about the appeals court ruling, guys. Check it out. Here you go. Let's see what Pam Bondi had to say. President Trump found there was a national emergency and took action under the law by imposing tariffs. The judges of the Federal Circuit are interfering with the president's vital and constitutionally central role in foreign policy. This decision is wrong and undermines the United States on the world stage. The Justice Department will appeal this decision and continue to fight to restore the president's lawful authority. So that is a statement from Pam Bondi. She posted that 9 minutes ago. Oh, thanks to Specific Gravity, the Dancing Dragon, for the gift memberships. That's so nice of you. Thanks also to Got Me Some, who thinks high tariffs in U.S. history have been linked to economic downturns. Thank you, Got Me Some, for your support. Thank you also, Your Binky, for your support on Twitch. Beautiful Profanity, who says, how would a refund work? That seems like an administrative nightmare. Again, the tariffs are still in place. If the Supreme Court sides with the appeals court, the tariffs will go away. I don't know this for sure, but it's certainly possible from what I've read that that if the Supreme Court agrees with the appeals court that most of Trump's tariffs are illegal, it's possible that those tariffs would have to be returned to the payers of them, so who are U.S. importers. So, which I don't know how that would be logistically to do, what a pain that would be. But one of the articles we read talked about that and said President Trump and the Justice Department said that would be really bad because the government would lose all this money it had had. Can I find this again? Where did it say this? Which article was that? Was that the one of the articles had talked about that? Okay, it wasn't that one. Was it the Reuters one maybe? Let's see. No, it wasn't that one. Was it this one? Now I can't find it. I know one of the articles talked about it. I hate when I can't find something we've already talked about. I know we talked about it. Hang on. Let's get this on the screen. Oh, it might be this one. One moment, please. Yes, I got it here. So AP said, oops, that's obviously not what I want to show you. AP said revenue from the tariffs now totals $159 billion. The Justice Department warned in a legal filing this month that revoking the tariffs could mean financial ruin for the United States. The government has argued that if the tariffs are struck down, it might have to refund some of the import taxes it has collected, delivering a financial blow to the U.S. Treasury. In a previous post on True Social, Trump said it would be 1929 all over again, a Great Depression. By the way, hang on. I'm going to show you the original post. If I can find it here. I can see the post here. I can see the post. Where is... What day was that posted? I don't know when Trump posted that. Oh, it was August. It was early August when he posted that on True Social. I found it. Here it is. So this is what Trump posted on August 8th on True Social, okay? He said, tariffs are having a huge positive impact on the stock market, he says. Almost every day, new records are set. In addition, hundreds of billions of dollars are pouring into our country's coffers. If a radical left court ruled against us at this late date in an attempt to bring down or disturb the largest amount of money, wealth creation, and influence the USA has ever seen, it would be impossible to ever recover or pay back these massive sums of money and honor. It would be 1929 all over again, a Great Depression. By the way, a court has ruled this today, but it's the appeals court, and so he's going to appeal it to the Supreme Court. He says, if they were going to rule against the wealth, strength, and power of America, they should have done so long ago at the beginning of the case, where our entire country, while never having a chance at this kind of greatness again, would not have been put in 1929-style jeopardy. There is no way America could recover from such a judicial tragedy. But I know our court system better than anyone, he said. There is no one in history that has gone through the trials, tribulations, and uncertainties such as I, and absolutely terrible, but almost amazingly beautiful things can happen. Our country deserves success and greatness, not turmoil, failure, and disgrace. God bless America. So he there is talking about what happens if the court rules against the tariffs. Now, they have ruled against the tariffs, but it's not the final ruling. The Supreme Court is left. Hey, shout out Jean Paul Lachance just gave 20 more people memberships. I think Jean Paul Lachance has given like 50 or 60 people memberships during the stream. That's really generous of you. Make sure you thank Jean Paul or somebody else if they give you a membership or a gift subscription. By the way, shout out to our moderators, Janet B., Beth Mythical, Roberts May Queen, over there on YouTube. Clearly, President Trump has been quite aware of these of the possibility that the courts could strike down his tariffs. because he's been posting about it, and he did post about it right when we were coming on the air, a short while after this ruling came out as we've shown you. He posted about the ruling. So clearly, he is aware and concerned about this possibility that the court system could ultimately strike down his tariffs, the judicial branch. Also, thanks to our moderators on Twitch, Big Ball of Yarn, David Green, LB Prairie Dawn, Matthew Kohai 3, and Sarah. Our Facebook moderators, Kay Larry Body and Margaret Riley have been over there. Shannon Davis Hughes. And also Linda Belk, Larry, and Misha on X. Jamie Rowland, our viewer, says, I guess if the Supreme Court sides with the appeals court, the ballroom will not be a go. I think President Trump had said he had gotten a bunch of donors to pay for the ballroom. I think I remember that. I'm not positive. Let me see if AP, I think they updated their article here. Yeah, so they did update their article. Let me just go over this again. An appeals court ruled today that President Trump had no legal right to impose sweeping tariffs on almost every country on earth, but left in place for now the tariffs. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit ruled Trump was not legally allowed to declare national emergencies and impose import taxes on almost every country on earth, a ruling that largely upheld a May decision by a specialized federal trade court in New York. The judges wrote in a 7-4 ruling, it seems unlikely that Congress intended to grant the president unlimited authority to impose tariffs, but they did not strike down the tariffs immediately, allowing Trump to appeal to the Supreme Court. And Trump said he's going to do that. Oh, White House spokesperson. I have a comment from the White House. Here in the AP article. White House spokesman Kush Desai said Trump had acted lawfully in imposing the tariffs and said, we look forward to ultimate victory on this matter. An attorney, Jeffrey Schwab, an attorney for small businesses affected by the tariffs, said the ruling shows that Trump does not have unlimited power to impose tariffs on his own. This decision protects American businesses and consumers from the uncertainty and harm caused by these unlawful tariffs, said Jeffrey Schwab. A dissent, one of the dissenting judges, I guess, one of the dissenting rulings today, I don't know if there were more than one, a dissent from the judges who disagreed with Friday's ruling. I guess this is a dissent, the judges who disagreed with today's ruling posted a dissent, which clears a possible legal path for Trump. Those judges said the 1977 law allowing for emergency actions is not an unconstitutional delegation of legislative authority under the Supreme Court's decisions, which have allowed the legislature, Congress, to grant some tariffing authorities to the president. Anyways, I'm not a legal expert, so I can't comment to you on the likeliness of Trump winning the case in the Supreme Court or not. And the ruling today says 2 sets of import taxes are illegal. The sweeping tariffs he announced on Liberation Day, April 2nd, and the trafficking tariffs he announced on February 1st on imports from Canada, Mexico, and China. The trafficking tariffs, he said, he justified by declaring a national emergency, saying there was an illegal flow of drugs and immigrants across their borders into the U.S. And on April 2nd, those tariffs, he said, were justified by a national emergency, which was the long-running gap between what the U.S. sells and what it buys from the rest of the world. By the way, the law in question here, if you want to read more about it, the law that President Trump had cited to impose these tariffs by declaring national emergencies, and that the appeals court today said, no, that law does not give you this power. It's the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. That law authorizes the president to regulate international commerce after declaring a national emergency in response to any unusual and extraordinary threat to the U.S., which has its source in whole or substantial part outside the U.S. Now, I don't know what was the original motivation for this law. I don't even know. Does it even say here? Congress had enacted the law to clarify and restrict presidential power during times of declared national emergency under this 1917 law. Starting with Franklin Roosevelt, presidents had the power to declare emergencies without limiting their scope or duration, without citing the relevant statutes, and without congressional oversight. All right, that's interesting. I'd like to read more about this later. HD Nero, our viewer, thinks the tariffs will stay, no worry. We did a poll before, and about 60% of you, if I remember right, said you thought that the Supreme Court would overrule the appeals court and the tariffs would stay. Wow, Jean-Paul Lachance gave, I'm not kidding you, 50 more people memberships. That is incredibly generous of Jean-Paul Lachance. Thanks so much. I hope people thanked Jean-Paul for the memberships. I believe he's given over 100 during this one broadcast to people in YouTube. Glenda says, buy American people, problem solved. Fred Withrow says Trump's fake emergency. So he doesn't think that the emergencies that Trump declared to impose these tariffs were real emergencies. Now, by the way, there might have been some other case. There were multiple cases challenging these tariffs. And I don't know if some of the cases tried to argue that the emergencies weren't national emergencies, the kind of which the law says must be declared. So I don't know. And so there's other cases besides this one. The AP had said, for example, that Trump's assertion that this law essentially gives him unlimited power to tax imports quickly drew legal challenges at least 7 cases. So I don't know. I believe there's in one of the other cases they have ruled against Trump. I don't know about the other cases. I'm guessing that ultimately the Supreme Court will just rule on the whole thing, on all the cases, if they've been appealed. I'll see if I can find, before we get off the air, some kind of estimate on how long it would take. The Washington Post article said this could take months for the Supreme Court to rule on this. I don't know how many months we're talking about. But, you know, it's not going to happen next week. Scott Bayer says, our viewer Scott Bayer says, when the Supreme Court rules on the tariffs, I think Scott thinks the Supreme Court is going to find the tariffs illegal, and the Treasury does not get the money they expect, the big, beautiful bill will be the biggest scam on the American people in history. Mad Mike thinks tariffs are completely the president's power. If Congress doesn't like it, they can change the Constitution. hold on a second here. You can see here, AP says the Constitution gives Congress the power to impose taxes, including tariffs, but over decades, lawmakers have ceded authorities to the president, and Trump has made the most of the power vacuum. So that's certainly going to be a huge ruling that's coming up in months, I guess, when the Supreme Court will rule on whether most of Trump's tariffs are illegal. And if they rule with the appeals court, the tariffs will go away, just like that. I don't know what's going to happen. Let me just check one thing here. Yeah, I mean, so I'll post a link again to the ruling, and you can read it if you want. But I mean, you can see in this summary paragraph at the start, it says the government appeals a decision of the Court of International Trade, setting aside 5 executive orders that impose tariffs of unlimited duration on nearly all goods from nearly every country in the world. That the Court of International Trade in May had ruled that the tariffs were not authorized by the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And then the government had appealed that ruling, so it went to the appeals court. The appeals court said, because we, the appeals court, agree that the law's grant of presidential authority to regulate imports does not authorize the tariffs imposed by the executive orders, we affirm the lower court's ruling. Okay? And they say that the case involves the extent of the president's authority under this law to regulate importation in response to a national emergency declared by the president. And it gets, again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to try to follow all their ruling here. And then they go through all this before they get to the merits of the case. This is just the ruling that I'm scrolling through here. It's a couple dozen pages, I think. So you can see one part of the ruling says that the law that Trump cited as the authority to impose tariffs provides that after declaring a national emergency pursuant to the NEA, the president may investigate, block during the pendency of an investigation, regulate, direct and compel, nullify, void, prevent or prohibit any importation or exportation of any property in which any foreign country or national thereof has any interest. Notably, they say, the court, the law does not use the words tariffs or duties, nor any similar terms like customs, taxes, or imposts. The law also does not have a residual clause granting the president powers beyond those which are explicitly listed. So again, that's part of their ruling that this law does not, they say, give the president power to impose these tariffs. But this is all, I mean, I'm just scrolling through here. This is all just the majority ruling that I'm scrolling through. You can read the whole thing if you'd like. And then they say whenever Congress intends to delegate to the president the authority to impose tariffs, it does so explicitly, clearly, they're saying, either by using unequivocal terms like tariff and duty, or via an overall structure which makes clear that Congress is referring to tariffs. This is no surprise, as the core congressional power to impose taxes such as tariffs is vested exclusively in the legislative branch by the Constitution. And they say, contrary to the Trump administration's assertion, the mere authorization to regulate, which the law gives them, does not in and of itself imply the authority to impose tariffs. Okay, and they talk about the government's argument, why they disagree with it. And then, yeah. So the ruling is about 45 pages long. Again, it's from pages 1 to 45 is the majority ruling. I believe you can find the minority, the dissent in there too. I just posted the link in the chat. But if you want to, you can open up that document, and the first 45 pages will be the majority ruling. I haven't gone through the whole document yet. But again, the basic idea is that the majority said that the law that President Trump said gives him the power to impose these tariffs, and the law that President Trump said is a law where the Congress gave the president the power to impose these tariffs, the majority is saying, nope, the law does not give you that power. So it's a question over what this law says and what the law does. All right, we'll read a few more comments here. I know it's a technical topic, but it's a very important topic, and we'll have to see what the Supreme Court says. Pumbaa says no one is above the law. But we will cover the Supreme Court ruling on this. Chris N. thinks it was written, the explanation was written by a leftist. Crying in the Dark says, I voted for a president, I didn't vote for a judge. Corn Dog thinks Trump is clearly going to win. Bay Muse says Trump is the national emergency. Paul Winkle says there's a reason why Trump doesn't ask Congress. U.S. Rights and Freedoms thinks SCOTUS has the final say and Bondi and White House statements are accurate on this matter. All right, any more posts from Trump about this? No, he posted that one post. Any more posts from anyone else I want to show you? Let me just check a couple things here. Howie said, who are the judges on this Federal Circuit Court of Appeals? So I don't know who specifically they are, but one of the stories we talked about mentioned who they were appointed by. Was it in the... It was either the Reuters story or the AP story. Let me see here. Yes. So... Again, there were 11 judges who ruled 7-4 against Trump in the appeals court. 6 of the judges in the majority and 2 judges who dissented. So 8 of the 11 were appointed by Democrats, 6 in the majority and 2 dissented, while Republican presidents appointed 3 of them, 1 in the majority and 2 dissenters. I don't know enough about why they dissented and what their reputations are. Because you might say, oh, well, 2 of the 3 Republican appointed judges on this appeals court, 2 of the 3 were for Trump and not against Trump in this ruling. But I don't know how that will carry over to the Supreme Court. It's a good question. I don't know enough about the specifics here. Thank you for the question, though, Howie, for writing in. I'll be interested to see what people who really know, who are legal experts, who know the Supreme Court, think the chances are of this getting of how the Supreme Court will rule on this either way. Michelle Lauzon, who I think is outside the U.S., says, "You are so screwed as a nation." Wow. It's also interesting this came out, I mean, I don't know if it's just chance, but it came out on Friday, about like, what, an hour and a half after the markets closed, before a long weekend. Now, Bloomberg says that the administration could go to the Supreme Court. They could also go to they could let the Court of International Trade revisit the matter first. I don't know about that, but President Trump has said the Supreme Court is going to help out on it. So it sounds like they're going to the Supreme Court, but I don't know. Multiple reports I've seen have said it's going to the Supreme Court next. All right, guys. I think we've, for now, done. Oh, by the way, the John Paul a chance. John Paul just gave 20 more memberships. I've lost count. What is it, like 130 or something, this broadcast, John Paul? Wow, unbelievable. John Paul a chance just gave 20 more people memberships. Unbelievable. How will this affect the stock market, says Kimberly? I don't know. I did hear this. When this happened, as I was getting ready to come on the air, I turned it on CNBC. One of the CNBC analysts thought that it might not have a huge effect on the stock market because it's not a final ruling. The tariffs are still in place. We still don't know what's going to happen. So, I guess it could affect it one way or the other if people think it's more or less likely today that ultimately the tariffs will go away. But maybe a bunch of people, investors are like, well, I still don't know how the Supreme Court's going to rule on it yet. And I didn't know that yesterday. So maybe it hasn't changed, but I don't know. I mean, some people might think, well, it's more likely now the tariffs will go away because the appeals court has put out this ruling. Don't know. So it's a fair question. And then Bitcoin, I don't know. Bitcoin had been dropping the last day or two, but I don't know that it had a big impact on it. I thought it maybe went up a bit when the ruling came out, but it might have had nothing to do with the ruling. I mean, someone might claim, well, if this ruling makes it more likely that the tariffs will go away, maybe that could be good for the economy or something. So, and then you might draw conclusions from that, but I don't know, And also, it's like, who knows what the Supreme Court's going to do? And I'm just saying there's a lot of uncertainty here. We don't know if the tariffs are ultimately going to go away because we don't know what the Supreme Court is going to do. But I was looking here. Yeah, it kind of looks to me, I'm looking at a Bitcoin chart, and Bitcoin was in like the high 107,000, close to high 107,000s. And then right around the time of the ruling, it went up a bit to like 108,500, which is it's not the hugest move. So I do think there's a chance that the ruling pushed Bitcoin up a little bit, but I don't know. All right, guys, I think we did what we came here to do. We came here to talk about this ruling, and we showed you President Trump's response, and we talked about what might happen in the future, and we discussed how the Supreme Court is going to rule on it maybe in a few months. And also, we talked about the de minimis exception going away today, which is a whole other thing. But I think it's time to wrap this up. But, you know, it's not the final ruling yet, but it's an important ruling, which is why we covered it. So, and a lot is at stake, guys. That Supreme Court ruling. Will they side with Trump, or will they side with the appeals court? And if they do, most of the tariffs just go away. Wow. And then the Trump administration, would they have to pay back these over $100 billion so far in tariff revenue? And then what happens to the trade agreements that other countries have concluded with Trump to try to get the tariffs down? Wow. So it would be a really huge thing if the Supreme Court sides with the appeals court. Our viewer, Vicky Gem, says the worst thing for any nation is instability. Trump is giving you exactly that. Well, with the tariffs, certainly I'll say this. Businesses right now don't know. Businesses don't know in a few months if these tariffs are still going to be in effect or not, right? Because we don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do. So that is some uncertainty. Storm Laughter says no sense in what ifing about all this. It's just going to create angst. Okay. So I'm going to start wrapping up this live stream. If there's other big news tonight, we can come on the air and cover it. But I really appreciate you guys. Hold on a second here. I really appreciate you guys. What is this here? I really appreciate you guys tuning in for this story, for this coverage. And a lot of people were messaging in the chat and discussing it and sending me messages and letting me read your comments on the air and sending me updates. So I appreciate that as well. So again, we'll cover the Supreme Court ruling on this and whenever that happens. And what was I going to say? Well, I mean, put it this: the one way in which, if the Supreme Court ruling if we know in advance when it's going to be, that would be helpful. If the Supreme Court comes out and says we side with Trump, I will probably cover that. I mean, it would make the bigger change would be if they said they don't side with Trump. But for now, I'm assuming we're going to cover the Supreme Court ruling. You can yell at me if we don't. Anyways, I really appreciate people being here for the stream. If there's big news tonight about another story, we can come on the air and do another live stream. And I will post updates to this story if I see them. I will post updates on my X account, which is @Lookner. You can follow me over there, @Lookner on X. I post breaking news updates there all the time. And I'll post the link in the chat to that. And subscribe and follow the channel, Agenda Free TV. We cover all kinds of live breaking news without an agenda here, Agenda Free TV. And like I said, I don't know when big news events are going to happen, but if you want to get sent a notification whenever we go live so you don't miss a stream, we have our own live notifications system set up. It works great. It's really reliable. I would suggest you sign up for that. It's very easy to sign up. The mods will post a link to the free notifications in the chat, and you can also find the link to the notifications in the YouTube and Facebook description for this broadcast. You can find the link to the notifications there. I would sign up to those. By the way, I know it's, I hope people didn't feel misled by the title. I mean, a court did, most Trump tariffs ruled illegal. On Facebook and YouTube, where I put the description in, literally the second sentence of the description was, the case is expected to be appealed to the Supreme Court. So in no way was I attempting to mislead people into thinking this had been conclusively ruled on. I mean, maybe you didn't read the description of the broadcast, but I clearly stated in the description, and I said right when we came on the air that, and I've been saying it over and over and over again, that the Supreme Court was going to rule on this. So no attempt was being made to fool you into thinking that, oh, this has happened with finality. I don't like doing that. So, and oh, also, look what look what I put in the headline. SCOTUS appeal expected. That's been in the headline the entire broadcast, right there. So no one was trying to fool you. Okay, I forgot I put this here. See? Right there for you. Big story anyway, though. Thanks to our moderators who have been here, Cynthia Moon, Beth Mythical over there on YouTube. I really appreciate it. They're the ones who keep the chats civil and respectful, and we couldn't have the chats without them. So thank you, Cynthia Moon, Beth Mythical over there on YouTube, all of our other moderators who have been over there. Thank you so much. Over on Twitch, thank you so much there. Big Ball of Yarn, LB Prairie Dawn, Matthew Kohai 3, Sarah and Surly Dev. Thanks for modding over there. On all of our Twitch moderators, Margaret Riley, Kay Lowry Body, Paul Anderson, Shannon Davis Hughes on Facebook. Thank you for moderating. And our Linda Belk, Larry, and Misha, who moderate for us on X. Thanks to all of our moderators. Thanks to everybody who donated. That is so kind of you. Did I get everybody? Cece, thanks for your support on Twitch. Morty Mouse 77, thanks for subscribing on Twitch. And Marvel Abides gave 5 people gift subs on Twitch. And Douthis gave a gift sub on Twitch. Wow, that's really nice of you. Thank you for the gift subs over there on Twitch. Very kind of you. And again, thanks to Jean Paul LaChance, who gave well over 100 gift memberships. Wow, crazy. That's so nice of you, Jean Paul. And everybody else on YouTube. I think I thanked everybody over there. Oh, Cynthia Moon gave 5 memberships. Thank you, Cynthia. That's super nice of you. Thanks to Paul for your support on YouTube. Thanks, Benny Hill. Benny Hill says, faced with 1929 scenario or more taxes, which is worse at this point? The thought of having to pay all that money back would be pretty seismic, says Benny Hill. Benny Hill, thank you. Thanks to Fox250R for the gift memberships. I think Jean-Paul LaChance gave 20 more that I didn't even see. Thank you so much, Jean-Paul LaChance. So kind of you. If you ever want to donate, you go to agendafree.tv, but that's what allows the channel to exist. So thank you so much for supporting the channel and allowing this channel to exist. We do have a chat. You can chat with other viewers when we're not live. A lot of our viewers like doing that. It's the Discord chat. It's free. It's the same link as the free notifications. So check out the Discord chat. Big thanks to our Discord mods for all you do as well. Another good way to find out when we're live is to follow us. If you're on X, follow Agenda Free TV on X. I always post there before we're going live and give you a heads up. I post updates about the channel there. Agenda Free TV on X. And if you are a YouTube viewer, I would suggest turning on the YouTube notifications. Another good way to help find out when we're live. But it's a little tricky to do that. If you want to turn on the YouTube notifications, what you have to do is do this. You have to subscribe to the channel and then click on the bell and choose all notifications. So subscribe to the channel, click on the bell, and choose all notifications. That's how to turn the YouTube notifications on. Shout out to our Facebook subscribers who subscribe and support the channel over there, like Robert Rial II, Sharon Klassen Goslin, Chuck Mosca, and Kay Lowry Body and Margaret Riley. Our viewer Deb Kriminger says the amount brought into the U.S. Treasury from the tariffs have been quite large. It would be a bunch to pay back if they have to pay it back. We'll have to see how that plays out. Thanks to all of our other, that I thank Kay and Margaret for being subscribers over there on Facebook, and all of our other Facebook subscribers. Thank you. Really appreciate you subscribing to the channel. And hang on a moment here. Our Twitch subscribers, shout out to them. People like Wall Street and Shaggy, Billy Joe, SDFDSV, Artful Nothing, thanks for subscribing, and Sarah, and who else is over there? Douthis, Marvel Abides, Morty Mouse, Beautiful Profanity, Shells 80, Cece. Thank you to all of our subscribers. Really, really appreciate all your support on Twitch. Chi-Town Bear, thank you. And on YouTube, our members and all of our new members. Thanks to everybody, Jean-Paul Chance and the others who gave gift memberships. Thanks to our YouTube members, people like Calligram, Dinar, Ken Lance, Joe Hart, Mindset Accessories, Macro Geek, Storm Laughter, Evelyn in Maine, Bluesy Girl, Knight Templar, Basic J, Kiwi, Esther F, Calligram, Dean R, Jerry Kovacs, Songbird, Hermit Ersatz, Cynthia Moon, Wickedest Witch, Benny Hill, Patricia Grace, Storm Laughter, all of our other YouTube members too, Warren Tinsley, Cruella. Thank you. All right, we're wrapping up this story. We'll see what the Supreme Court says about this and if the tariffs ultimately go away, if the Supreme Court agrees with the appeals court. Big ruling coming up. We'll have to see what happens. I don't know what's going to happen. I do not know. All right, guys. Thank you again. Thanks to everybody else for watching as well. Really appreciate you being here. Remove Glazers now. Thanks for being here. Sandy Phillips, Joe Farah, Tia Christie, Lori Nance. Lori Nance think the ruling will be overturned. Orion Spice, thank you. And everybody else watching, really appreciate you tuning in. Admiral SAS says, I would laugh so hard. I would LOL so hard if he had to pay it back. We'll have to see what happens. All right, guys, that is it. Thanks for joining us for our live coverage of the appeals court ruling that most of the Trump tariffs are illegal. We'll see what the Supreme Court has to say. If the Trump administration appeals this, like President Trump suggested they are going to. That is it for now. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you soon with more live breaking news coverage right here at Agenda Free TV.